My name is Celeste, 32 years old. That evening, in the house where I had spent years trying to be accepted, I brought what I thought would be a gift to bring everyone closer. A wheelchair worth nearly $2,500 that I had saved from the money set aside for my dream of becoming a mother. But instead of a thank you, my father-in-law looked straight into my eyes and said, "Return it. I'd rather crawl than accept charity from you." The table burst into laughter. Even my husband lowered his head with a faint smirk. In that moment, I understood I had never been part of their family. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by the very people who were supposed to protect you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to follow along, because right after this, I'll tell you what really happened after that dinner. I was born in Portland in a working-class family where everything had to be earned with sweat and patience. My father was a mechanic, my mother worked night shifts at a supermarket. We didn't have much, but at least I grew up in a home where honesty was valued, where promises were kept and effort was recognized. That's why I learned to stand on my own 2 feet very early. I worked part-time while in college, some days carrying trays of coffee in the morning, then working at the library at night to afford books. When I graduated, I promised myself I would never let anyone belittle my hard work. But when I married Ethan, the eldest son of Harold and Margaret, I slowly learned what it meant to live in a world where every effort of mine was treated as if it were nothing more than expected. Their family was the type where at the dinner table, men sat waiting while women served and cleaned. They believed women needed to know their place and be grateful just to have a seat there. From the beginning, I was different. I spoke my mind, I gave suggestions when needed, and I refused to be treated like a shadow. But it was exactly that frankness that made Harold look at me with disdain. I remember one time he said to Ethan, thinking I couldn't hear, "You didn't marry a wife, you hired a manager." The words cut into me like a knife. I waited for Ethan to react, to defend me, but he said nothing. The silence was so deep it made me wonder if he had ever seen me as his partner at all. When Harold needed hip surgery, the whole family suddenly disappeared. Ethan said he was busy with a company project. His younger brother, Troy, excused himself with a business trip. Margaret claimed she wasn't used to medical care, so the nurses could handle it. I looked at them, then at the man lying in a hospital bed, and knew that if I didn't step in, no one would. So I threw myself into arranging everything. I contacted the hospital to make sure a nurse visited daily, created a medication chart by the hour. I shopped for groceries, cleaned out the fridge, rearranged the living room so Harold could move more easily. I called the insurance company, waiting on hold for hours just to get approval for extra therapy sessions. Many nights I sat in a hospital hallway chair, the hum of the air conditioner above me, clutching my laptop to finish work while checking medical bills. I didn't expect Harold's gratitude, only hoped that one day he would realize I had truly been there for this family. I gave up so many dreams along the way. After graduating in physical rehabilitation therapy, I once dreamed of opening a small clinic of my own in Portland, a place where people could regain mobility after injuries. But when I married Ethan, I set that dream aside. I told myself, wait a little while until things are more stable. But that little while stretched on endlessly. Instead, every paycheck went to cover his family's needs: dinners, utility bills, Harold's treatment. Quietly, I opened a small savings account dollar by dollar, hoping one day it would be enough for IVF. I longed to become a mother, knowing it wouldn't be easy for me. Yet in their eyes, nothing I did was ever enough. I wasn't their daughter, not their blood, only a useful woman, always present when needed, never truly acknowledged. Once during dinner, Margaret watched me clear the table and sneered, "Celeste is busier than the maid." She said it like a joke, but the whole table laughed. I held a plate full of leftovers, forcing myself to swallow the lump in my throat. Harold never hid his contempt. He didn't need to raise his voice. One look from him could turn a crowded room suffocating. I had tried to talk to Ethan. "Do you see how they treat me? Do you see I feel like an outsider in this house?" Ethan would brush it off, saying, "Don't think too much. That's just how my parents are." Wanting to keep peace, believing love could change things, I chose silence. I endured, I compromised. I told myself that if I was patient enough, if I cared enough, maybe then they would see me as family. But little by little, I realized I was erasing myself. There were nights I sat alone in the study, organizing Harold's medical bills and paperwork. My hands shook from exhaustion, my eyes burned from endless numbers, yet I reassured myself, at least they'll know no one else but me handled this. But the next morning, when I handed Margaret the documents, she barely glanced and muttered, "Fine, I'll look later. No thank you. No kindness." Some nights I left the hospital close to midnight, rain soaking my shoulders. Coming home, I found Ethan on the couch, beer in hand, eyes glued to the TV, not even glancing up as I walked in. I told him Harold needed a better wheelchair, one that relieved spinal pressure. He shrugged. "If you think it's necessary, go ahead and buy it." His words were so light, as if I were asking what color tablecloth we should use. To Ethan, to his whole family, everything I did was simply assumed. I paid, I arranged, I managed. And it was that assumption that slowly made me disappear from my own life. The day Harold was discharged, I brought him home, carefully helping each step up the porch. Troy excused himself again. Margaret stood inside and called out, "Careful not to scratch the new tiles." No one helped me, no one cared if Harold was in pain. So I kept going. I didn't quit. I chose the best wheelchair, using the savings I had set aside for the chance of motherhood. I believed that if Harold could sit more comfortably, if the family saw how much I sacrificed, maybe, just maybe, they would look at me differently. I was wrong. I still remember that evening vividly, every detail like an unhealed wound. The wheelchair I ordered, after days of research and thought, was supposed to be the symbol of all my quiet effort. I pushed it through Harold's front door, thinking this time they would see my heart. But within seconds, everything in me collapsed. Harold sat at the head of the table, his face pale from surgery, but his eyes sharp as blades. He stared straight at me, then spoke slowly, each word falling cold against the floor. "Return it. I'd rather crawl than accept charity from a woman like you." The whole room froze. I heard a spoon clatter against the table. Then suddenly Troy burst out laughing, tapping the table. "Come on, Dad." Margaret covered her mouth, giggling, casting me a glance as if it were all a funny story. Ethan just sat there, eyes down, lips curved in a faint smirk, like an outsider. I clenched my hands so tightly my nails dug into my skin. I waited for someone to object, for anyone to say, "Enough," or at least, "That's too far." But no one did. The silence was more brutal than the insult itself. I could hear my heartbeat pounding, threatening to break free. Every sound around me, the scrape of chairs, the clink of silverware, the murmurs of laughter, pressed down on my chest. But I refused to cry. I wouldn't let them see me weak. I gently placed my napkin on the table and rose from my seat. Without a word, I walked into the kitchen, gathered every plate, every half-empty glass, stacking them as if it were any ordinary night. I washed them under the running water while behind me their chatter and laughter carried on. When the last dish was clean, I returned to the living room. The wheelchair was still there, abandoned in the middle of the room. I slowly pushed it toward the door, folded it, and placed it in the trunk of my car. I closed the door softly, without a goodbye, without an explanation. Outside, the wind cut sharp against my face. I drove away, not knowing where to go. I couldn't return home, not to the place where Ethan would pretend nothing happened, where I would have to sit across from the silence of the man who let me be humiliated. I stopped at a small hotel 2 towns away, booked a room using the credit card still under my name. The receptionist handed me the key with a polite smile. I nodded in return and walked upstairs. The room wasn't anything special. A double bed with white sheets, a dim bedside lamp, and the faint smell of bleach. But to me it was the only place that night where I could breathe. I sat on the bed, still wearing the sweat-soaked dress. I lay on my back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The clock showed nearly midnight, but I couldn't close my eyes. Every word, every laugh from the dinner table echoed in my head. I heard Harold's voice again, slow, dripping with contempt. "I'd rather crawl." And then came the laughter of the others. I turned over, pulled the blanket up, but I was still cold. Cold from the inside. I thought about everything I had done. The evenings spent waiting hours on the phone with the insurance company. The early mornings buying fresh food at the market, stocking their fridge. The times I changed bandages, helped Harold sit up, while the rest of the family vanished with endless excuses. And in the end, all I got was a single humiliating sentence. I once believed that if I were patient, if I tried hard enough, one day they would see me as family. But that night, lying in a strange bed, I knew for certain that day would never come. I switched on the light, sat up, and opened my phone. Old messages from Ethan appeared on the screen. "I'll be home late, eat first." "Too busy, we'll talk tomorrow." "You're good at this, handle it." A long list of short, careless words. No thank you. No sign of appreciation. I put the phone down and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I wasn't crying because of them anymore. I saw more clearly than ever. If I stayed silent, I would lose myself. I walked to the window, pulled the curtain open. Outside, a streetlight cast a dull yellow glow. Few cars passed, only the sound of wind whipping through the trees. I looked out, my chest trembling, not from fear but from realizing I was standing at the threshold of truth. The next morning, faint light slipped through the hotel curtains, waking me after a nearly sleepless night. I sat up, my body heavy, my mind exhausted, but inside me was a strange clarity. Maybe because I had reached the end of patience with nothing left to lose. I pulled the laptop from my bag in the corner. The first thing I did was log into the joint bank account with Ethan. Numbers flickered on the screen, the money I had sweated for years to save. I knew most of it, nearly all of it, came from me. I worked 2 jobs, I saved, I gave up the dream of opening a clinic to cover the family's expenses. And Ethan? He never had to worry about utility bills, debts, or the struggle at the end of the month. He lived comfortably, came home late, and complained about trivial things. I took a deep breath and transferred all the money into a new account under my name alone. My fingers trembled as I typed the final password, but my heart was strangely calm. I wasn't taking from anyone. I was reclaiming what had always been mine. When the words "transaction successful" appeared, I shut the laptop. I sat motionless, pressing my hand to my face, a mixture of bitterness and relief washing over me. For years, I had lived as my husband's free accountant and manager. Not anymore. My phone buzzed in my bag. I pulled it out. It was a notification from the Ring app, the security camera at Harold's house. I remembered. 2 years ago, after Harold's surgery, he had given me access to monitor nurses and deliveries. They had never thought to revoke it. I hesitated for a few seconds, then opened it. The screen showed a clear image from the camera above Harold's porch. I saw Ethan standing there, still in last night's clothes, hair messy, holding a coffee mug. His mother, Margaret, stepped out, handing him another cup. They sat on the steps, chatting as if nothing important had happened the night before. Voices came through the speaker. Ethan's tone was relaxed, even joking. "She's probably sulking somewhere. That's Celeste. When she's upset, she leaves, then comes back." Margaret chuckled softly. "You've spoiled her too much. That girl always acts like she's above everyone else." Then from inside, Harold's voice rumbled out, hoarse but still commanding. "The sooner she's gone, the better." I sat frozen, the phone burning in my hand. I waited, I hoped, for one word, just one. That Ethan would object, that he would defend me, that he would tell his parents. Enough. She's my wife. But no. He just sat there sipping his coffee, nodding. A rush of hot blood surged through me. All my long-held doubts were confirmed. To them, I had never been a wife, never a family member. I was only a high-level maid, unpaid, keeping their books, paying their bills, arranging everything. A manager they had hired without a salary. I remembered the times Harold called me over to handle his pile of messy papers. Unpaid bills, handwritten receipts that didn't match, numbers in disarray. I sat for hours in their living room, sorting each sheet, typing each number, then handed Harold a neat summary. He nodded, never a thank you. And I had comforted myself, thinking at least they trusted me. But that morning when I heard him say, "The sooner she's gone, the better," I knew it had all been an illusion. I dropped my head into my hands, eyes squeezed shut. There was nothing left to hope for. The phone buzzed again. A text from Ethan appeared. "Where are you? Come back, don't overreact." Overreact? He had sat there, hearing his father insult me with vile words, and still thought it was nothing serious, that I was the one at fault for overreacting. I let the message fade, letting the phone fall silent. I walked to the mirror on the hotel wall. The woman staring back had dark circles under her eyes, lips pressed tight. But in that gaze I saw something new. Determination. I realized I wasn't afraid of losing Ethan anymore. Not his family, not even the fragile shell of a marriage I had tried so hard to protect. What made me tremble now wasn't fear. It was the realization that I had let them define my worth for far too long. I reopened the laptop, pulled up old files, the scans I had saved when managing Harold's books. Handwritten invoices that didn't match, cash amounts that disappeared, unjustified deductions. They were all still there, every line, every figure. A question rang clear in my mind. If they despised me this much, if to them I was nothing but a tool, then why should I keep protecting them? Outside the window, the sun was rising, light flooding the room so bright it stung my eyes. But this time I didn't turn away. I let the light hit me full on, a reminder. It was time to face the truth. I returned home on a windless afternoon. The house that had once held all my trust and dreams now felt cold. I went to the bedroom, opened the wooden cabinet Ethan had never noticed, and crouched down to the floor, where a small safe sat with the code Harold had once pressed into my hand. That year he had claimed his health was failing, his records a mess, and I, the daughter-in-law good with paperwork, had taken over. I remembered thinking, at least they trust me. But now, as my hand touched the icy dial of the safe, I knew the truth wasn't so noble. The door swung open, the smell of old paper and ink wafting out. Inside lay a heap of disorganized documents, handwritten bills, expense reports, worn leather notebooks. I pulled them all out, spreading them across the bed. My eyes scanned the numbers, the scribbles I had once diligently typed in. Only this time, I wasn't looking with the dedication of someone trying to help a family. I was looking with the eyes of someone awakened. Each invoice revealed naked deceit, repeated equipment repair costs with no receipts, oversized travel expenses, though I knew Harold had never been to those places. And off-the-books income, hastily scrawled in shaky handwriting. I picked up one paper, ran my finger across the words, cash, not reported. A cold blade cut into my palm. I opened the laptop, plugged in a USB, and began scanning page after page. The blue light blinked, the scanner's hum filled the silence. I saved multiple copies, carefully labeled, then copied them onto 2 external drives. One I kept in my desk drawer, the other I sent directly to a close friend working at a law firm in Seattle. This time I wasn't covering for anyone. I was protecting myself. When everything was ready, I sat at the dining table, the divorce papers in front of me. I had asked a skilled lawyer to prepare them. That woman had looked at me firmly when we met in her office. You must be sure, Celeste. This isn't a step backward, it's the only way out. I signed. The pen trembled for a second, then struck firmly. The next day I filed the papers in court. At the same time, the lawyer helped me freeze the mortgage debt on the house. That house, in truth, wasn't marital property. It was in my name, bought with the inheritance from my grandfather. Ethan had never noticed that detail. He still assumed, what's mine is ours, and treated the house as his. When the news reached him, Ethan exploded. He slammed the door, stormed into the living room where I sat sorting papers. His face flushed red, his voice cracking. You want a divorce? Over a chair? Just because of one thing my father said. Perhaps for a moment he expected me to burst into tears, to justify myself, to cling. Did you hear me? He shouted, his voice hoarse. We once vowed to stay together and get through everything. And now you're leaving me, over a wheelchair? I still sat there calm. In my head, every time I had been alone at the hospital played back while he was busy drinking beer with friends. Every time I scrambled to pay the bills while he slept. And the final moment when he lowered his head and let his father call me cruel names. I set the pen down softly on the table, my voice slow but firm. Not because of the chair. He froze, not understanding. I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. What I needed to say I had already said through my actions. He stamped his foot and stormed out, the door slamming like an explosion in my chest. I took a deep breath and let his fury pass like the strong wind outside. When the house grew quiet again, I looked around. This had once been the place where I hung so many wedding photos, so many memories. But now those frames were nothing but empty frames. I took them down one by one and put them in a cardboard box. I felt lighter, as if I were clearing out a ruined room to get ready to rebuild from the ground up. That night, the lawyer called and told me the court had accepted the filing. She added, "We'll request a temporary order to freeze the mortgage account. He won't be able to use this house to borrow or sell without your consent." I thanked her and set the phone down. Outside, the rain pattered steadily. I stepped onto the porch and drew a deep breath. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a prisoner in my own marriage anymore. In my mind, the scanned files lit up like secret weapons. I knew Harold and this entire family would never imagine that the woman they saw as a free manager was holding evidence that could change their fate. Ethan thought everything was about the chair. But he didn't understand. That was simply the final moment when I let go of the illusion. A week after I filed for divorce, the thing I least expected happened. That morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from an unknown number, but I knew it was Ethan. Before I could open them, a notification popped up from the Ring app. The camera at Harold's house that they had forgotten to revoke my access to. I opened it and the image on the screen left me speechless. In the living room, right in front of Harold's familiar armchair, the wheelchair I had brought, then been humiliated over, suddenly reappeared. It wasn't pristine anymore, nothing like when I first bought it. The paint was scratched, the wheels smeared with mud, the armrests scuffed as if it had been dragged somewhere. It lay there, facing Harold like a reminder. Harold saw it and his face went pale. He roared, his voice rough and echoing. Who did this? Margaret rushed out, clutching her chest. Troy stood rooted to the spot, eyes wide. No one understood what was happening. But what I remember most was Harold's eyes. For the first time, they weren't full of authority. They were trembling, bewildered. They searched the house, checked the doors, then argued loudly. Finally, Margaret grabbed a bundle of sage, lit it, and waved smoke around the room as if to drive away bad luck. Watching through the screen, I saw her even tape over the living room camera lens. Her whisper floated out. "This is a curse. Someone wants this family destroyed." I turned off the screen. Inside me was not satisfaction but a strange, deep stillness. They had sown fear with their own hands. I remained outside, silently watching. That afternoon after work, I walked to the parking lot. The air was crisp, the last light of day spilled in orange-gold streaks across the pavement. I had just opened my car door when a man's voice sounded behind me. "You think you've pulled off something clever?" I turned around. Ethan stayed there, arms crossed, face flushed, bloodshot eyes. He looked at me like he wanted to crush me on the spot. "My father hasn't slept all week," he growled. "My mother's having episodes." "What did you do?" I set my purse on the seat and closed the door. But he moved closer, refusing to back off. "Say it. You brought that chair back, didn't you? You want to haunt them to death, is that it?" I looked him straight in the eye, my voice calm, each word clear. "You sat there while they called me trash, and you laughed." Ethan faltered, his mouth opening as if to argue, but no words came out. He blinked. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "You always love playing the victim." He spat, pointing at me. "You're destroying this family and then dare to blame us." I opened the car door, got in and started the engine. He stayed there, slamming his hand on the window, hissing through his teeth. "You'll regret this, Celeste. I swear." I raised the window, leaving his furious face outside. I drove off, his footsteps echoing through the parking lot behind me. That night, I sat in the newly rented apartment, watching streetlights cast shadows through the curtains. I replayed every detail of that dinner. The laughter, the contempt, the jabs. Now they were the ones haunted by the very object they had used to humiliate me. They called it a curse, but in truth, it was a reality they couldn't escape. The phone lit up again. A new message from Ethan. "Stop before this goes too far." I set the phone on the table without replying. Because deep down I knew, things had gone too far long ago, back when he laughed while his father called his own wife trash. I sat in front of the computer, hand on the mouse, my heart pounding. The folder of documents I had quietly scanned over the years opened before me. Mismatched handwritten invoices, murky ledgers, and the cash income Harold never reported. All this time I had stayed silent, telling myself I was helping the family. But the humiliation at that dinner had wiped out every last illusion. I opened the IRS website and chose the option to file an anonymous complaint. One by one, the files uploaded, accompanied by the notes I had written clearly. When I hit submit, my hand trembled, but not from fear. It was the feeling of someone finally setting down the burden she had carried for others for far too long. I thought it would end there. Audit notices, a few letters requesting explanations. But only a few weeks later, I realized I had touched a much hotter fire. One night, while combing through old files, I found a small folder I hadn't noticed before. Inside were documents related to a trust in Harold's name, set up more than 10 years ago. The beneficiaries were clearly listed: Ethan and Troy. The amount in the trust wasn't small, millions of dollars, but there was absolutely no trace of it in the official tax filings. My heart pounded. This wasn't a few fraudulent invoices anymore. This was an organized concealment system. I printed a copy and put it in an envelope. Then, in a moment that surprised even me, I sent it to Troy's fiancée, Emily, a young woman I had only met a few times at family events. I remembered her eyes at the engagement party beside Troy, bright, eager, yet wary. I knew Emily was smart enough to understand what I sent. 3 days later, a text arrived from an unknown number. "Why did you send me this? Is it real?" I didn't answer. A day after that, Troy called, his voice ragged. "Are you trying to destroy my happiness?" Emily read everything. She says she'll call off the wedding if I don't explain. I heard his heavy breathing, curses mixed in. But I didn't respond. I hung up. That very week, the IRS expanded the investigation. The chaos in that family was obvious even without the camera footage. News reached me through many channels. Harold was summoned to provide explanations. Ethan was called in for co-signing multiple contracts. I even had written confirmation from my lawyer. They could no longer hide. Late one evening, I got a call from Margaret. Her voice trembled, nothing like her usual sarcasm. "Celeste, please, stop. Harold, he had a heart episode. The doctor says he must avoid stress. You know that you took care of him." I heard her choking back sobs. For a moment, a flicker of pity rose in me. Memories of nights I changed Harold's bandages, stayed up late calling the insurance company. But then the words from that dinner rang out again, sharp and merciless. "I'd rather crawl than accept charity from you." I pressed the phone to my ear, my voice steady. "Ma'am, I didn't make him cheat. I didn't make him sign fake invoices." On the other end, Margaret sobbed. "But the family, this family is falling apart. Don't you see?" I knew that if I spoke now, I would say words she would never accept. That the family had been broken long ago. From the day they chose silence when I was humiliated, from the day Ethan laughed instead of standing by me. I set the phone down and let her sobs fade into the void. The next day I read Ethan's message. "Have you done enough yet? Do you want to see my father die? This is the man who raised me. Do you have a heart, Celeste?" There was nothing left to say. Because if he had ever had a heart, he wouldn't have sat there laughing while I was called trash. If he had ever had a sense of fairness, he wouldn't have let me carry every financial burden for years. Night fell and I reopened the trust files. Numbers don't lie. The signatures of Harold, of Ethan, and of Troy were all clear. The IRS was involved now, but I still kept my own copies in case they tried to erase the trail. That morning, I received a short email from Ethan. Not the usual blame or threats, just one line. "Meet me at the old diner, 7 p.m. 15 minutes to talk." I read it over and over, torn. Most of me wanted to ignore it. But maybe, after everything, I needed to face him one last time to close this myself. By late afternoon, I put on a black coat, tied my hair back, and drove to the diner off the highway, the place we used to grab late-night meals after movies. The parking lot was empty. The glass door was fogged, neon lights blinking red and green outside, making the place feel both familiar and distant. I walked in. Ethan was already in the corner beneath a faded mural. He looked thinner, dark circles deep under his eyes, shoulders slumped. The coffee in front of him was half gone, his hand trembling slightly as he set down the spoon. Ethan spoke first, his voice rough. They're going to pin everything on me, Celeste." He gave a crooked, bitter smile. "You think the IRS will stop at my father? Well, they're dragging everyone in. They have my signature on contracts. They have emails, statements. And who did the books? Who provided documents?" I drew a slow breath. He said nothing about his father's fraud, nothing about the humiliation I endured. He cared about one thing, himself getting dragged in. He braced his elbows on the table, leaning toward me, eyes red. "You know what, Celeste? Your biggest mistake wasn't sending papers to the IRS. Your biggest mistake was marrying someone like me." For a moment, the whole room seemed to go still. I heard the faint clink of cutlery at the next table, the static of the radio on the bar shelf. But his voice, those words, pounded in my head like a hammer. Suddenly, all the pieces from the years fell into place. The times he left me to handle the hospital alone, the times he sat silent while his parents mocked me, the curt texts, the cold looks. And now he admitted it in another way, that to him I had never been a partner. I was a wrong choice. Ethan waited, hoping I would explode, would argue. But I didn't. I pushed back the chair and slipped my arms into my coat. The chair creaked as I pushed it back. He panicked, calling after me. Celeste. You can't walk away. We used to. I paused for a second but didn't turn around. I let him hear the sharp rhythm of my heels on the tile, each step decisive. When I pushed the door open, cold air hit my face, carrying the damp scent of approaching rain. I inhaled deeply. There was no anger left in me, no bitterness. Only a clarity that cut to the bone. I had gone too far to turn back. Behind me, through the glass, I saw Ethan still sitting there, head in his hands, a miserable silhouette. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel pity. I simply felt that I had stepped out of a circle I had locked myself in for years. Outside, the first raindrops began to tap against the window. I let them fall for a few minutes, listening. Then I started the car and drove away, the diner's blinking neon fading in the rearview mirror. News about Harold's family didn't stay private. It spread. The local paper reported that the IRS had officially seized assets, frozen accounts, and the secret trust was dissolved. Harold had to accept a plea deal to avoid facing federal court. The grand house that had been his pride was sealed, luxury cars towed one by one. Ethan didn't escape. The files he had signed, the murky contracts, everything was brought as evidence. The company he'd worked at for years fired him that week. I heard he tried applying to smaller places, but with a criminal record, no one wanted him. Troy had Emily return the engagement ring, then moved away and cut all contact. The family I had tried so hard to belong to shattered piece by piece. Not because of me but because of the choices they had made. As for me, I left the city. I didn't bring much, just a few suitcases of clothes, some essential documents, and the hard drive with my work and notes I had saved. I chose Seattle. It wasn't far from Portland but far enough for a fresh start without ghosts trailing me. On my first day in the new apartment in Capitol Hill, I flung the windows open. Cool spring air swept in, carrying the scent of flowers and the sound of horns from the busy street below. I looked out at tall buildings and small cafes tucked along the block, and a strange feeling rose in me. I had truly gotten free. I rented a small space on the second floor of an old brick building, just enough room for a few treatment tables and a reception area. I hung a simple sign, Therapy Movement Center, Celeste. It wasn't a fancy clinic, but it was the dream I had set aside for years. In the early days, I painted the walls myself, installed shelves, polished the mirrors. I hunted down used equipment, inspected it carefully, then placed each piece where it belonged. When the first treatment table finally stood upright, I stepped back, touched the pad lightly, my eyes blurring. I whispered to myself, finally, it's mine. My first client was a woman in her 70s, limping after a hip fracture from a fall. She squeezed my hand and smiled gently. Dear, I'm afraid I won't walk again. But seeing you, I believe I'll get better. Her words made all those years of strain feel worthwhile. I worked with her wholeheartedly, recalling every exercise and technique. Each time she smiled because she'd taken a few more steps, my chest felt lighter. No more mocking laughter, no more cold stares. Only the belief that my work mattered. After hours, I slowly reconnected with my own family. I went to my mother's house on a rainy afternoon. She opened the door, looked at me for a long time and said just one line, "You're too thin." I burst into tears in her arms. All those years of silent endurance, of keeping distance because I thought I had a new family, broke open into tears. My sister ran out and hugged me, chattering about everything I'd missed. For the first time in years, I sat at a table without bracing myself, without swallowing humiliation. I also met old friends in Portland. In a warm cafe, they laughed and said, "You finally came back to yourself." I didn't need to explain all I'd been through. They looked at me with kind, understanding eyes, and that was enough. One evening, I found myself in my therapy room, watching the last lights spill through the window. On the desk lay a thickening appointment book, clients growing by word of mouth. I breathed deeply, feeling my lungs fill. I knew this was real life. Not dinners full of derisive laughter, not the hopeless waiting for a husband who once promised to protect me. It was each day lived true to my profession and my worth. At night, I went home to my small apartment and cooked myself a simple meal. I ate slowly, listening to soft music drift from an old radio. I felt at peace, the kind of peace I thought I'd never touch again. I knew this new life wasn't perfect. I still had to work hard to keep it going. There would still be tired days. But every morning when I rose from bed, my heart felt lighter, my steps steadier. Seattle, with its sudden showers and misty mornings, became the place I began again. And in each raindrop sliding down the window, I heard a familiar whisper. I chose the right path. Looking back, I understood that sometimes silence can be stronger than 1,000 words. I walked away and kept what belonged to me. But I also learned that silence cannot last forever because at some point you have to stand up and put a period at the end of what hurts you. Any one of us can end up in a similar situation, belittled, cast aside, or turned into a tool in our own family. So what will you choose? Keep enduring to preserve the shell or dare to let go to find yourself again? I want to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. Your story might be the encouragement someone out there needs. And if you want to keep listening to stories with many angles on family, kinship, and life choices, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because in the next episodes, I'll share more journeys, where each decision, each step, can change an entire fate.